Welcome to the JCPS MTSS training on the Feedback Toolkit with a focus on the high-yield practice feedback as a result of engagement. I am Sarah Adams, MTSS Engagement Resource Teacher with Zone 1.
And I'm Amy Downs, MTSS Engagement Resource Teacher, Zone 2. Please take a moment and type the case-sensitive bit.ly shown at the bottom left corner of the screen into your web browser. This will allow you access to all the links for future reference. These are the components of MTSS, multi-tiered systems of support. As you can see, MTSS provides multiple levels of support for all learners and aligns resources and support with our district's 6 systems for students and for teachers who deliver and support instruction. MTSS addresses academic, social, emotional, and behavioral development. It focuses on overall school improvement that is sustainable. This concept map provides a visual of the departments within MTSS. The MTSS academic department supports schools by ensuring teachers are providing all students with academic support that includes differentiation, personalization, and enrichment activities with a focus on Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions and support. The supervisor and point of contact for this department is Donna Lawson. The MTSS Behavior Department supports schools in implementing school-wide behavior systems and frameworks, including PBIS and restorative practices. In addition, the team supports school personnel in understanding and utilizing classroom management strategies. The supervisor and point of contact for this department is Sandra Hensel. Our department is MTSS Engagement. The goal of our department is the MTSS Engagement Department is to increase student achievement by equipping teachers with high-yield pedagogical practices to maximize student engagement. The leader and point of contact for our department is Dr. Naomi Brahim. The point of contact for each department is located and linked in the concept map. 6 MTSS toolkits were created to provide resources for Tier 1 instructional practices to increase student engagement and reduce student behaviors. Here are the 6 MTSS toolkits. Now that you are more familiar with our department and our toolkits, let's talk about feedback, one of the biggest influences on student achievement. What is feedback? It is information provided by an agent about aspects of one's performance or one's understanding. The agent providing the feedback can take many different forms. It can be the teacher, student, parent, coach, book, or even one's own experience. Furthermore, research shows that the most powerful form of feedback is from the students to the teachers about their impact on the students. During this session, we will examine the definition and perspectives of feedback. As a result, you will be able to analyze feedback and determine if it is effective or ineffective. You will also reflect on feedback when lesson planning. So how do we as teachers know that we are successful in this practice of feedback as a result of engagement? As mentioned earlier, our training focus for today is on the high-yield practice feedback as a result of engagement. The success criteria, or how a teacher might demonstrate success implementation of this practice, is by delivering frequent feedback that is specific to a student's action, skill in relation to learning. To elaborate on the definition of feedback as a result of engagement, it refers to a teacher's indication to a student whether a behavior, action, or skill was demonstrated correctly, which is the basis of the success criteria we just discussed on the previous slide. Feedback can be simple or complex. We will see some examples in just a little bit. According to researcher John Hattie, the effect size of feedback is 0.75. Considering any practice which equals a typical year's growth would have an effect size of 0.40, this strategy, at almost double that, is very useful for accelerating learning. The most powerful form of feedback is from the students to the teachers. Successful teachers are capable of giving students feedback on their learning processes and of demanding and interpreting feedback on the teaching process. There are 3 questions that feedback should address. They are, where am I going? How am I going? And where to next? Although most feedback addresses the first 2 questions, students prefer feedback that addresses the 3rd question. There are 3 perspectives of feedback. Feed up, which tells the students where they are going and sets the purpose. Feedback, which tells the students how they are doing and where they are along the learning continuum. And feed forward. This guides the students forward and is based on performance data. Feed up is about the teacher and the students being clear on the purpose of the lesson and the attendant learning. This includes learning intentions, which is our we will, and success criteria, how students will know that they are successful. Sometimes success criteria can come in the form of a rubric and/or exemplars of student work. So what does feed up look like? Well, this is an example of feed up. The learning intention lets students know what they will be learning. The success criteria helps students to understand what they need to do to be successful. In this example, students are learning how to write effective claims. The success criteria lets them know what they need to include to have an effective claim. The teacher may also want to include a rubric. All of this will help students to know where they are going and provides criteria for what they need to get there. Using models for student work and providing students with critique lessons can be a powerful tool to use in the classroom and in the virtual world. There are 3 critical steps in the critique lesson. First, you want to choose exemplars to model with. These models don't have to be perfect, but you should illustrate the standards you are teaching and the skills that you want students to learn. These models are used to show students where they are headed and can be referenced when students are stuck. The second step is to define the purpose for the critique. What do you want students to get out of the lesson? For example, let's say your students are working on argument writing. After showing them the exemplar, you want to have a list of specific questions that will help guide them. How does the author organize their ideas? Or how does the author use evidence to support their ideas? Finally, the third step is to choose a discussion protocol. You could start by having students work in small groups and to have them do a virtual chalk talk using the comment function on Google Docs. Set the criteria for how many comments each student must make and if they need to reply to someone else's comment. This helps to build collaboration in the virtual world. There are 2 links attached for additional resources. The critique lesson will take you to an EL website, which will provide you with more resources for how to conduct a critique lesson virtually. If you click on the Tools tab, this will take you to a variety of resources that are helpful for planning discussions in the virtual world. Feedback helps students to understand how they are doing and where they fall along the progression. Some important characteristics of feedback. Timely, the sooner the better. We will look at some of the tools later in this presentation that will assist teachers in giving timely feedback. Feedback should be specific. Feedback such as nice job or you need more will not help move students forward. Feedback should be specific and actionable. Feedback should also be collaborative. Learning is a partnership between the teacher and the student. Feed forward builds on the feedback to help students to know where to go next. It helps the student progress towards a goal or learning intention. For example, if the learning intention is to write an effective claim, what feedback can I give this student to help move their work forward? This is also where success criteria can be helpful. Which component of writing a claim does the student include, and which do they need to work on? Providing students with a score or saying, "You need more details," is not effective because it is not specific enough to help move the student's work forward. Feedback needs to be specific. In the first example, the feedback provided lets the students know that they understand the task by telling them their use of the process for balancing chemical equations is clear and accurate. Their next step would be to elaborate about the products produced in the equation. When feedback is given, it is important to ensure that the feedback is interpreted and received. Now that you've seen examples of both effective and effective feedback, let's test your knowledge in Feedback Frenzy. On the left-hand side, you will notice various examples of feedback. Some are effective and some are not effective. You're going to read each example and decide which category it belongs under. We're going to do a couple together. Let's start with the first one. Great job. While this is positive, it is not an effective example of feedback because it's not specific and the student does not know what he or she did well. Let's look at the next one. I like the way you use the character's words and actions to determine the character trait. This would be an example of effective feedback. This example is supported with specific details as to what a reader should be looking for when determining character traits. We have linked the Jamboard. Come on back and test your knowledge with the remaining examples. The answers are on the second screen of the Jamboard, but no peeking.
Here are some more examples of effective feedback. Now that you have mastered punctuation and character development, what can you master next to create more interesting writing pieces? Your use of the process for balancing chemical equations is clear and accurate. Can you elaborate on your explanation about what products are produced? The construction of the model for your environmental project is very neat and contains additional details from what you had in your draft sketch. What can you include in your writing to better educate others about the workings of the objects in your model? Each feedback question works at 4 levels. First, feedback can be about the task or product, such as the work is correct or incorrect. Next, feedback can be aimed at the process used to create the product or complete the task. Feedback can be focused at the self-regulation level, including greater skill and self-evaluation. Lastly, feedback can be personal in the sense that it is directed to the self. The first level of feedback is the self. It includes all feedback aimed at the individual receiving the feedback, such as praise. It focuses on the learner, not the task. An example would be, "You're a hardworking student." Feedback at the task level involves providing the learners information about the product of their learning. For example, the teacher can assign a task with problems the learners must solve to reach the learning goal. The teacher then corrects the task and marks the answers as correct or incorrect. In this way, the learners see clearly what they can and cannot do. Feedback at the process level involves providing the learners information about the process they use to complete the learning task. For example, The teacher can inspect the tasks for evidence of how the learners completed them. The teacher could provide the students with feedback on how to identify errors and make suggestions for addressing them using different methods. The students would then receive feedback about how they worked. Feedback at the self-regulation level involves providing the learners information about the mechanisms they apply to regulate their learning. This type of feedback makes it clear to the learners how they self-regulated the product and the process of their learning. Here are some ways to incorporate feedback successfully. Build trust with students. Help students to see errors as opportunities for learning. Plan feedback opportunities. Build your students' capacity to use feedback. Model responding to feedback. Develop a growth mindset in your students. Give students opportunities to utilize all sources of feedback: self, peer, and student to teacher. As mentioned above, one of the ways to successfully incorporate feedback is to plan feedback opportunities. Here's an example of a possible schedule you may want to use for planning the different perspectives of feedback. We know that feedback needs to be timely, specific, and provide students with information about where to go next. The following is a list of tools and resources that you can use to provide your students with feedback. In the next two slides, we will show you examples of using Screencastify and voice notes. To find out more information on the other resources, all you need to do is click on the underlined links and it will take you to more information. One resource I want to point out is creating rubrics for your assignments in Google Classroom. Rubrics are important tools for providing students with specific feedback. The other resource I want to point out are the PBL timelines. These units were created by the Deeper Learning Department and have a built-in feedback system that will allow teachers to provide feedback that is timely so that students can make changes along the way rather than waiting until the end. Feedback can be formal or informal, but sometimes for students, holding a student-teacher conference can allow time for appropriate feedback. Teacher-led conferences may be more frequent in the beginning of projects, but the goal is to have more student-led conferences to drive the discussion near the end of the project. Screencastify is a tool that will allow you to provide your students with recorded feedback. You can include a video of yourself or just your voice. Research shows video or audio feedback is better understood and better received as compared to written feedback, and thus video or audio feedback can be more effective in many cases. Written feedback does not always convey your tone, which can be important to understanding the feedback you're trying to give. Screencastify or other video recording tools are great to use with Google Docs and slides. Here, the student turned in a claim they wrote on a Google Doc. The teacher used Screencastify to provide the student with feedback. All the teacher had to do was click the record button and then provide the student with effective feedback. As you listen to the recording, think about how the feedback is specific, actionable, and is tied to the success criteria for this lesson.
The claim you included is focused on the topic and is specific. You included not only that you're going to be talking about violence in video games, but also the effect that it has specifically on children. However, I want you to think about, could you maybe try to include an opposing viewpoint in your claim? This will let your audience know that you have thought about all sides of the argument, and it'll make your claim even stronger. What do you think?
Switching gears from video feedback, voice notes is one way to provide audio feedback. Voice notes is part of Read and Write for Google Chrome, which can be added as an extension through your apps. Here's our example of a student claim, again, that was submitted on a Google Doc. First, you highlight what you want to give feedback on, just like when giving a comment. Then you click on the voice notes button to record your feedback. When the student opens up the document again, then they click the link in the comment. You can also use this tool to provide multiple voice notes throughout a document. On this slide, we've included some videos that show various ways to provide feedback utilizing Google Classroom, and in some cases, using other Google applications. The first video includes grading with a rubric in Google Classroom, which we mentioned earlier, and also shows how to provide specific feedback using comments, either within a Google Doc, Google Slide presentation, a PDF, or a video. The second video shows how to utilize Google Sheets within Google Classroom to have students self-reflect on their work using a rubric. The third example shows one way that you could incorporate peer-to-peer feedback using Ask a Question within Google Classroom. This example includes peer feedback on book talk videos, but this way of offering peer-to-peer feedback could be used for other assignments as well. Now that we've learned about ways for teachers to provide student feedback, let's look at a few options for students to provide feedback to teachers. As we mentioned earlier, when we review the definition, feedback from students to teachers is the most powerful form of feedback. There are many options available, and we have just listed a few. Some ideas for student to teacher feedback include Google Forms, which we will look at more closely in just a minute, Jamboard, Pear Deck, and Nearpod. While we won't go in depth for each option listed, as mentioned on one of our earlier slides, please just click on the underlined word or words to get more information about any of these examples. For Google Forms, they can be used in many different ways for feedback: student to teacher, teacher to student, and even student to student peer review. Let's take a look at one option for using Google Forms. This would be for student to teacher feedback. What's pictured is a screenshot of just a portion of a Google Form exit slip. In this example, the teacher asked open-ended questions. She uses the same form on a regular basis, so she kept the first question in general terms and asked students to answer a question that she would display on the board. She would display a different content-based question every day for students to answer on the form to check how they were understanding the content. Other questions include what they learned today and how they contributed to their group. All student answers are tabulated and given to the teacher in an easily readable format. If the options are multiple choice, where the student just has to click agree or disagree, for these types of questions, the teacher has compiled all the responses in a spreadsheet, which is very easy to do with Google Forms. Once she compiled the spreadsheet, she did add some formatting options. She added conditional formatting to color code the answers as green or red, so she could easily see where anyone disagreed with the statement. This gave her information to talk one-on-one with students to address specific concerns. She also added a row under the headings with formulas to calculate the percentage who agreed on each question. And looking at that data, she noticed that only about 75% of her students felt challenged. So as a result, she plans to hold her students to higher expectations and increase the rigor of her instruction and assignments. While it's not shown here, you can also ask questions where you have students rate their level of understanding using a scale such as 1 to 5 on certain aspects of or topics in the lesson. You could then sort the compiled data to help you plan for individual and small group instructional needs. You could also use pictures or emojis along with words if your students need that support. Now that we've learned ways for teachers to provide students feedback and for students to provide feedback to teachers, let's look at a few options for students to provide feedback to students. Like teachers, students can add audio comments using voice notes in Google Docs. They can also leave text comments in Google Docs, slides, and sheets. We have linked directions on how students can provide peer feedback in Google Classroom. It is imperative that we are only using software that has been approved through JCPS. This is updated often. Please check the list, which is linked on this slide, to ensure all software you are using meets approval. As we conclude, take a moment to reflect on feedback in your lesson planning. Do you give well-considered and purposeful feedback from various perspectives? Do you include peer-to-peer feedback? Do you review your lesson by inviting feedback from students? Do you make learning visible? In any classroom, the teacher should be aware of certain considerations regarding the environment or learning community that they are helping to create. Knowing the backgrounds or the cultural norms for students within the classroom will lead to more engaging and effective instructional practice. Giving students opportunities to respond, especially with dialogue, validating their contributions, and providing them with feedback helps to remove barriers and move learning forward. In classrooms where ECE students are present, use of opportunities to respond with your students should occur more often based upon the needs of the learners. With those opportunities, consistent progress monitoring and feedback should be provided. Planning for and providing multiple means of engagement through relevant and authentic activities is important. When considering project-based learning, feedback is critical to student success, both from the teacher to the student and from student to teacher. Conferencing with the use of rubrics throughout the process will benefit students and allow them to be more successful. In order to help with implementing feedback as a result of engagement in your classroom, we have provided you with the Plan, Do, Study, Act tool, which is linked on this slide. During an upcoming PLC, be sure to discuss ways to implement effective and equitable feedback into your instruction. We have provided you with some resources that were used in this presentation. Thank you for joining us and learning about feedback as a result of engagement. If you would like more information about our department or our toolkits, please follow the link to our website. Thank you.